Okay, oral storytelling is fascinating for a couple of different reasons to me. One is the length, another is the depth, and the last is what it says about our shared human consciousness. When people tell stories to each other, it's amazing how far back in history they can go. This is a great article I just read a couple months ago called Memories Within Myth by Patrick Nunn, who wrote a book on the subject. And he talks about the Kanath people and how they remember the explosion of the volcano that caused Crater Lake. That happened about 8,000 years ago, and they can still describe it. So that's about 300 generations back. They remember about this lake. In similar circumstances, from Scotland to the Australian Aborigines, you have stories about the water levels rising. And that was about 8,000 years ago. There was a big melt, and ocean levels went up a lot and caused a lot of changes. And all across the world, people remember those ocean levels going up about 8,000 years ago. Then there's the length of what people can remember. For instance, the Quran. There are many people who are alive today who have memorized the Quran because if you do so, it's a way to get yourself and a number of your friends and family into heaven. So who wouldn't do that? But that is only one book. Above me is my copy of the Mahabharata, and it is the largest epic poem in human history. And there are people who memorized all of this. Each of these is about 200 to 250 pages, and there are people back in the day who kept all of this in their head. And it's all of who was present at battles, what weapons were used, who begat who. It's a incredible mix of wisdom about how to respond in difficult situations, what's good and what's wrong when you can't quite be sure, as well as epic, wonderful battle scenes. You could see why it would be such an important thing for a culture to keep in its memory and to transmit with startling fidelity, which you've seen from the Mahabharata and its regional differences to the epics of Homer and how much they tend to stay the same. Speaking of memorizing important things, this is Mingan Sayadaw. He has a record because he memorized 16,000 pages of Buddhist texts and could recite them off the top of his head. And overall, to me, this speaks to something that Houston Smith said so beautifully in his World's Religions book, is that when an oral storytelling people have to keep everything in their head, what's useless is quickly discarded. You only have so much memory space that your culture can keep in its collective memory, especially when you don't have writing. And orality means that you have to be choosy about what you keep in there. So only the really important lessons survive. The ones about how your clan survives, how to act in certain situations, what brings all of you together. And so there's a lot to be said about the importance of orality and writing having ruined that in a way. And so I like that in some ways we are returning to a more oral culture. Lastly, if you want to read a really smart modern thinker on orality versus writing, who comes down the side of orality, check out Marshall McLuhan. He says some really smart things about this as well. So there's something about the importance of orality and oral storytelling in the human tradition.